So we see here the actor Anthony Anderson, who is one of the stars in Blackish, a series. And we see that even celebrities can have a tendency to get starstruck, where he shares that when he sees his mentor, someone he looked up to, James Earl Jones, coming out of the elevator, all rational thinking kind of just went away. He wasn't even cognizant, right? His emotions took over. He wasn't even cognizant of what he was doing. And he was more worried about how he was looking and didn't even realize that he had that newspaper turned upside down. And so there are other symptoms of being starstruck. You get weak in the knees. We see fans fawning, yelling, screaming hysterically, throwing items at people. They're famous, not to mention some of the most craziest things. Not to mention, following them, losing all sense of control. So just wonder, are any of you starstruck? Honestly. Anybody go crazy over a particular celebrity, actor, musician? I see a little bit. I think deep inside, some of us, I'm maybe being what maybe some people would call a spiritual geek. And what I find most exciting are the spiritual teachers of the day. And I remember one time when, it was just a couple years ago, and I was at a Gregg Braden retreat. And he is a little handsome, if I do say so myself. And he's wise and compassionate. And, years ago when I went to see him, he was a little bit more heady and intellect. But in that 4-day retreat that he experienced with him, I was really overcome by the feeling of reverence, of compassion that he had for each and every person. And I'm not usually the get your book autographed kind of person, but I felt called to stand in the line. Anybody get a book signed or an autograph from someone? And when I got up there to sign his book, it was like everything went out of my head for a moment. And then as I gathered myself, I just thanked him and shared my compassion. And someone snapped a picture, and I didn't even realize, because I guess I had gone numb for a moment. And I looked at the picture, and in that place of numbness, I didn't even see the space of compassion that he was holding for me. Like, it was so obvious in his face, his expression, his smile. And there was a moment of being, and I know it probably registered somewhere. But at least I have the photo now I go back to. So, not only, just as I talked about Gregg Braden, but throughout the ages, spiritual teachers and masters have been put on pedestals. And we have been in awe of them. If you go to Italy, you can see the masses gather to get a glimpse at Pope Francis. And it's not just this Pope, it's popes of the other, that have come before him. And there's something that seems to be unique about Pope Francis in his ability to be the common person, seeing himself as no better. And a lot of the spiritual masters have taught that as well, but he really exemplifies that. And not needing to have a special car, walking in the streets, being with people, getting people to come up off the floor, not to bow, but to be present, to bow at their feet. And we are doing the series on the Book of Joy, and we see the authors, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, that they share that they too seem to have where they attract the masses, where people can become hysterical in their presence. And in the book of Joy, they share something about their experience. Desmond Tutu shares, when I give a talk, I can't be worried about the size of the crowd. I cannot consider myself as simply another person, just like those in the audience. I too walk the human experience. So I am just one human being talking to another human being. Similarly, they should consider me as the same human being. If I see myself as special or better than anyone, I have moved into separation. And I, in that place, cannot be a force of good, and most importantly, of love. And the Dalai Lama shares, when I was young, I used to get nervous when I had to give formal teachings because I was not thinking that we were all the same. I would experience anxiety and would forget that I'm just talking as a human being to fellow human beings. I would think of myself as something special, and that kind of thinking would make me feel isolated. It is this sense of separation that isolates us from other people. In fact, this kind of arrogant way of thinking creates a sense of loneliness and then anxiety. We even see in the Course of Miracle where they talk about the little s, big S, the special relationship. There's somebody more special. Or are all relationships holy and sacred? And we can see by what I shared that neither of those men and most spiritual masters, I didn't say leaders or teachers, but masters meaning they are coming from a space where they are deeply connected to the truth of their divinity, to their humility. And both of them have no interest in being special or having superiority, because they feel that in that space of separation, they create their obstacle of joy. They create the obstacle of being connected to oneness. And when we are connected to our oneness and to our divinity, and when we are in the energy of sharing our spiritual gifts, that is when we know joy. We realize it in that moment. And so, just like other masters who have walked this earth, the master teacher reminds us of humility. In John 13, verses 5 through 8, Jesus says, "Then it is reported, then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel that he had tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, 'Lord, are you going to wash my feet?' Jesus answered, 'You do not know what I am doing, but later you will understand.' Peter said to him, 'You will never wash my feet.' And Jesus answered, 'Unless I wash yours, you have no share with me. And when I am gone, do as I do.'" So what he means here is that part where he says, "You will have no share with me." We cannot be one. And one of the things that the master teacher Jesus did was that he exemplified, he modeled his teachings. He wasn't just interested in spewing the spiritual the teachings. He embodied it. And so you need to have a little background as to what was happening at that Last Supper. Before he knelt down to wash the disciples' feet, the disciples were arguing. And what they were arguing is who was going to have the first place at the table. You see, in the day, having that first place at the table meant some kind of nobility or specialness. And so Jesus was a little bit frustrated, but being centered in his being, that whole washing of the feet, he was teaching, hey, do not worship me. We are the same. And if you cannot rise above having to be special or different, then you are missing my teachings. And so that's what it was all about. And so we talk about this morning about the second pillar of joy in the book of joy, which is humility. So the Dalai Lama shares a funny story before I get into a little bit more about humility. The Dalai Lama shares, both of them, they actually share rather cute stories throughout the book. And one of them he shares is that he was at an interfaith gathering where there were leaders all over in this circle, and he didn't mention by name, and I don't think it was an accident, but there was an Indian spiritual leader that was sitting next to him. And they're all waiting for the event to occur, and that particular leader that was next to him was concerned about how high his chair was off the ground, and that his chair, because of his rank, should be higher. And so the Dalai Lama takes a little staffing stick and he says, "What's the matter with the legs you have there? Aren't they high enough?" And then he said that he's mischievous, which means he likes to be playful in how he teaches. Jesus goes to the ground, but the Dalai Lama seems to have this mischievous way about trying to teach things. So he said, I have to admit, in my humanness, I was saying, they put bricks under his chair, so he was saying, when I first went into meditation, I was like, I hope those bricks fall. And then he sees that he falls just like any other human being, and maybe that'll take it down a notch. But then as he got centered, what he was really was going on deep within him was he knew that in this place of spiritual teachers who have gathered all around the world, that their work would be futile. They would bear no fruit. If people were worried about how they were sitting, crossing their legs, whose chair was high, whose chair was low, then it would be a waste of time. That they needed to gather there in love, in sameness, in connection, in the spirit of oneness so that they can move forward. And so in that beautiful teaching in John 13, and as I shared in the book of joy, we learn of the qualities of humility. It is something that seems to be commonly misunderstood. A lot of times we think of humility as being meek or timid or being lowly. But really the spiritual context of humility is to remember that we are all the embodiment of the divine. There is no one greater or lesser. That each one is endowed with divine gifts. We must be willing to lose the desire for specialness. And that really we are here to use those divine gifts in service to others. And most importantly, the teachings are we must move and go and use those gifts where we are called from within. What do we do most of the time? What's going to give us the most money? What's going to give us the best title, importance, prestige? right? What's going to get me the house? Many people, we see what? Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu and Jesus, they had no desire in all that, but yet they attracted. But they attracted out of their divinity, of their authenticity, of their love. Because when we're in their presence of truth, we feel it, we know it, we experience it. So, what might get in the way of walking the embodiment of our humility? See, a lot of times we talk about love, we talk about fear. We must know that on the dial of love there are many shades, and one of those shades or forms of love, yes, is joy, and it is humility. And on one of those dials we have fear, and many faces of fear. And the things that get in the way of us experiencing humility are the forms of fear we call pride, competition, and comparison. So, what is pride? Anybody want to share what they think pride may be? No, we're all being humble this morning.
Wanting the seats to be higher.
There we go. That's perfect. So here's what we know. Where we let our arrogance. It's a form of insecurity. And we know that pride is active within us. That we are in the consciousness of the fear of pride when you're upset if somebody doesn't address you by the proper title. Doctor, lawyer, teacher, minister, reverend. Or a person doesn't look at us a certain way or give us enough affection or attention when they greet us. And if we're in a restaurant, if we're not waited on fast enough, or if we think the wait staff or any other worker, the gardener, the lawn person, etc., is less than us, or that they're at our beck and call. And that can be insidious, very insidious. When I used to teach in the Holmdel school system, we had to take turns rotating in the cafeteria. Let me tell you, that was one of my favorite things. A bunch of hyper kids eating possibly a lot of sugar. And I remember walking over and just saying, hey, please, can you please move that to the trash? Oh, the janitors will get it. That's what they're here for. I'm like, well, you know what? They have a lot to do, and, could you please walk that over? And 3 times calmly saying, can you please walk that over? And I go, all right. Right? And so we could all wait when our meal's not on time, and things like that, where we get frustrated. And we can see that pride also is alive when we can't admit our part in a problem. We can't say, I am sorry. And so underneath pride really is the fear of humiliation. Humiliation is one of the most toxic fears Carolyn Mace shares with us. And you know that humiliation is active when you hear the voice, what will they think of me? What will they think of me if they knew that somebody in my family was an alcoholic or a drug addict, or knew that I was? What would people think of me if they know that I got demoted at my job? What would people think if they knew I was bankrupt? Or I had an abortion when I was young. We live with this embarrassment and shame and that feeling of less than, and it comes out sideways in all that we do. Or what would people think if I cancel my wedding? At my rehearsal dinner before my first wedding, the red flags and alarms were blinking, blinking, blinking. And I left early. At that time, my ex-husband was drinking, and I really didn't understand what full-blown alcoholism is because he had a great job. right? And I think people who are alcoholics can have a great job and make good money. So I left, I was upset, and I had that little whisper, is this the right decision? Pride, what would people think? So the following week, I'm in a limo, and I should have known, instead of being a white limo, I had a black limo pull up. Not a funeral we're going to. And my father turns to me and says, and he must have knew, because you know how parents just know, honey, are you sure about this? Oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional. And red light still blinking, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good, Dad. Now, I don't look back now in regret. And I believe that there is a divine appointment and that my children are divinely given to me. Who knows, I could have had them from another person, but I don't know, we'll go later. But what was more active in me was that pride, that fear of humiliation. What will people think? And then we go into the energy of separation called competition. And signs that you are in the energy of competition is that you want to be the best. You have to win. You have to distinguish yourself from everyone else. You need to be the center of attention or recognition. You have to be admired to impress others. And you're concerned about what everybody thinks about you. And that determines whether you should act or not act. And you think you know all the answers. This is when you're not open to beginner's mind. Do you ever try to share something with someone and they're coming from that, I know this all, let me tell you about it.
Yeah.
And they're not listening, right? That is that competitive kind of edge. And then in comparisons, that is the energy of winners and losers. Because when we are competing, we are comparing, and someone will lose and someone will win. Someone is better or less than. Even in a spiritual community. In spiritual communities, I can't tell you how many times I've been in workshops where I've heard people say, we're going to be the best church. We're going to have the most people. And I'm more interested in how can we best serve. I don't care about the numbers. I'm not saying that I don't look at things sometimes in my humanness. But that's what we're about. Where shall we serve? How shall we serve? Is what is alive. And we know that we are conditioned, all of these, pride, competition, comparisons, or what we are indoctrinated in our upbringing, in our family life, in our society, right? We're taught there's only so many people. It's a dog-eat-dog-eat world. There's not enough for everybody. And then sometimes what happens is if the only way we got attention from our family members is when we did something. When we got a good grade. Or we did some chore in the house. Or we comforted our parent. Then we can learn, oh, I get love when I perform and do great things. Not because of who I am. And so, my friends, in closing, if we are to remain connected to the truth of our being, and in doing so means that we are connected to our divinity, and then it is in that space we experience the joy of our being, we must cultivate humility. We must model it. It is the second pillar of joy. All the great masters, past and present, have exemplified it, from Jesus to Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, Sai Baba, and on and on. And in order to be grounded in humility, we must practice self-love and compassion. We must be able to embody our divinity and our humanity. And we must be able to recognize when we are in the spell of pride, humiliation, competition, and comparisons. And when we are aware, we must be willing, as the Course in Miracles says, to choose again. To choose again. To remind us of our truths. That I am here, yes, to boldly share my divine gifts. And yes, to share all the joys here. From a wonderful car to a wonderful house. But our ultimate purpose is about sharing and being connected to our divine being. And lastly, let us remember that we are no better or no less than each other, and knowing that at the very core of each and every heart here is a desire to be loved. So have a blessed week, a week where you are modeling humility, and I say, Namaste.